Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining both Martin, Catherine, and myself for the February edition of Data Platform Down Under. In today's session, we're being graced with John Miner's presence, who's going to be talking to us about how we can control our data lake with Databricks SQL Warehouse. This session is being recorded and will be made available on the Data Platform Down Under YouTube channel, which you can feel free to subscribe to have a look at all of the wonderful sessions that we have placed up there over the last couple of years. If you do have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat window where Martin or I will both be keeping an eye on those, and we'll be able to put those questions through to John. With that, we'll now hand over to John, who will take us through today's session.
Yes, hey, thank you for having me. My name's John Miner. I am a consultant at Insight Digital Innovations, the global partner. So I'm going to hide myself in a minute, and if you all want to do that, it'd be great because it'll save some bandwidth. I live in New England, not England like, where Marty is, and I've been friends with Martin and Warwick for a while through the MVP. I'm going to share some things with you, though. There's only one thing you really need to really write down if you want to, have fun with this demo in the future, okay? If you search for John Miner and John Miner SQL, not John Miner, because John Miner's the detective that actually found Marilyn Monroe dead in her bathroom, right? So that's the wrong hit. But if you do John Miner SQL, you'll get me. I got a plenty of post out there. One of the things you want to look at is my GitHub repo and the community work and everything I'm going through, including the PowerPoint, any images, the data which I was uploading right here, or the code is right there for you to use. Okay, so I do all this work and give it freely to the community. If you're curious where I've been or what I'm doing, I'll probably put this up later in the morning. These are the recent activities. I'm an MVP, like Greg and Martin and Warwick. It's a great gang of people that are continuously wanting to learn, right? So it's been fun for the last 7 years. Hopefully this is year number 8. If you're curious about what I blog about, I'm slowly approaching tip 100. So go see John Miner at MS SQL Tips, okay? And that's about it. So enough about me. We can figure out why this demo didn't work. We'll definitely do that during the debugging. But let me get to the presentation and let me make sure, like I said, my screen hopefully is off. And I did see a chat. So did you share your... Yes. So again, I'm going to put it right in the chat window, John Miner 3, and look for GitHub. If you do that search, you'll get any presentation I've done. They're all out there for free. Same thing with all the writing I do. I don't really do it for getting paid. Okay. I'll definitely not make a living on it for sure. And with that said, I'm going to turn off my camera and I'm going to minimize this and get into the demo and talk about Databricks. Now, this is a really cool, interesting topic. If you've been doing Databricks Spark like myself, you'll probably be like, well, it's Spark SQL. But how do they make it look like a data warehouse, right? And they did, which is pretty amazing that a company that, basically the founders made Spark, and then they basically turned Spark into basically a data warehouse. And we'll talk how they did it. So the purpose. Usually I like to outline this, and if Martin or Warwick, if you see any questions, I'll stop at certain key points and say, hey, if there's any questions, then I'll answer them then. So I always like to say a purpose, right? So many companies are moving their workloads from on-premise operational data source to in-cloud data lakes, right? And Spark is this processing platform that's a key player in this transition, okay? Many users, especially end users, do not know other languages or distributed processing. You have to worry about partitioning, and you have to worry about cluster size, and you have to worry about task, and you have to worry about writing some code in maybe Python or Scala, which is Java. Why would you want to know all that, right? So how can we enable them to be productive in a Spark-like environment, but not know Spark? They only know SQL, right? So today we're going to talk about the SQL Warehouse Interface provided by Databricks, which I think is really cool. Okay, Databricks SQL, what is it? Well, before we get into it, let's talk about what is Spark, right? And how they turned it from Spark to basically a data warehouse, right? So Spark's a unified processing engine, and it can do a bunch of things. And this is the image here. I'm not going to go read verbatim. You can read it here. But basically, when you have a programming language and you want to do data engineering, what we call data engineering is that ELT, that old school stuff, right? You extract something, you translate it, and you load it. And when you do in a data lake, you're actually reading a file, you're manipulating the file, and maybe combining a couple files and then saving it. Well, that's all being happening right here, right? With some programming language, you can do a data frame. Data frames have methods, dot select, whatever, but you don't want to know that. So I usually read it up with a spark.read, convert it into a data frame using a temporary view, and then do all the SQL stuff and then write it back out, right? So that's typically how I do data engineering. We're going to talk about in the data warehouse how to do it, okay? There's also three other pieces here, right? This machine learning, right? We're not going to talk about that. Streaming and graph, but that's the Spark ecosystem. So how do we take this piece of data engineering and turn it into a warehouse, okay? Well, this is the diagram that Databricks has, and this is basically what I took right from Databricks. So Databricks has designed an interface to make the Spark ecosystem look like a SQL data warehouse. That's all it is. And so how they do that? Well, you got this data lake, right? And it's Azure Data Lake Storage, ADLS Gen 2. And in here, you just have zones. And zones are just basically directories. You got a bronze zone, you got a silver zone, you got a gold zone. Those are different directories, right? And then underneath those directories, on top of that, we have this Delta engine. This is the Delta Lake, okay? And then the Delta engine, okay, we have different parts in which we have a SQL editor, so we can do some editing. We have a query catalog. How do you do a query catalog, right? Basically, when's the last query you ran? How long it took? What's the processing, right? Dashboards and alerts, okay? And then basically, when we have all this, right, we also want to connect to it and do something, right? So we want a client connect like ODBC or JDBC to actually get to this warehouse that's running. We also want to have some security. And last but not least, how does it go faster? One of the things that Databricks realized once they built this warehouse, it was a little slow. So they went back and created something called Photon, the Photon engine. And it's just a better optimizer for the regular optimizations they've been doing for Spark, and they're using it all over the place. Okay. So once you have this data, what can you do with it, right? You can put it into other places, right? You can do Synapse for Cloud Data Warehouse. You can bring the Synapse, you can bring in Power BI, you can do Data Explorer. So, what's a SQL Warehouse interface? You got a SQL editor, right? It allows you to explore a catalog, which is your database, right? And let's talk about it. You got a catalog at the top level, but then you don't really have a database. You have something called a schema. And underneath the schema, you have tables and queries, and you can execute the queries one time or a schedule, and you can save it as code. So I did hear a pop. So did anyone have a question? Nope. It was just a weird pop. Sorry about that. Just wanted to be attentive on it. But we also have to manage the workspace, right? How to we can, go ahead and we can, manage folders, cold files, and dashboards. Okay. I did hear that again. So, work. You hear me? Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, it's all good, John. It's just a couple of people joining the session.
Okay, no worries. I was just like, oh my God, am I dropping? Because it would be a long aisle of talking to myself, and at the very end, I'd be like, oh, where is everyone? Never had that happen yet, but there's always a chance, you know? So I'm going to hide the presenter view again. So we have the workspace. How can you create a folder, right? Inside the folder, how can I query a query file? How can I do a dashboard alerts? That's what the workspace is. And then the queries is how do we run queries, right? Alert is like, hey, we want to, for a given condition, have an alert, right? And then data, we can explore the Hive catalog, where the warehouse, how can we define, start, and terminate computer power, and the admin console, how to set parameters for the warehouse, okay? So I'm going to minimize that, and I'm going to take a quick look. This was the other session I was doing with Databricks with the scopes, so I just wanted to go ahead and take a quick look at this, right? Secrets list. Scope. This was here. I'm still having a little problem with this demo. So let's scope straight. Yeah, so anyways, I'm going to give you some background on this. One of the things you have to worry about, there is a few admin things you have to set up. You have to connect the warehouse to some storage, right, to get that bronze layer going. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm creating a key vault, and the key vault is now mounted to KVS for TIPS 2021, right? I just wanted to make sure that that key vault, okay, is the right one because I did see the demo. So if we go back to my dashboard where I pin everything, that's the right key vault. The only other thing I'm thinking is that maybe there's a rights issue because I just put up the files. They should be there. They're not there. But we'll get into working that out in a minute, okay? So when you go into, let's start off by closing out of here. I'll definitely close out of here, close out of here. This is the interface, but all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna close out and act like, hey, we never saw it, right? So when I do things in Azure, I like to deploy them and pin them to a dashboard. It's easy when I'm going, I have a bunch of objects, which one's which. This is what I was trying to do is get Databricks to set up SQL on here so I could decommission this one to save a few bucks. Still haven't gotten it yet. So I'm gonna have to, holler at Databricks and say, hey, please, do this so I can get it fixed and decommission, save a few bucks. But like I said, there's going to be three environments when you come here. And this environment is meant to be just for end users, the SQL environment, or business analysts who don't have that much computing experience, but you give them some scripts and say, hey, this is how you do it. And guess what? Suddenly they're off and running. They can attach to data lake storage, read in files, stop manipulating stuff, right? So if I was doing data science engineering, like mounting something from Python, I'd be here. We're going to talk about the data warehouse. So this is the data warehouse right here. And the very first thing in any of these technologies, this is even Snowflake, if you go to Snowflake, is to start the warehouse. So we have the warehouse running, right? And unlike a cluster in which you can tell it what the VMs are, you just get, hey, I got a small size. What does the small size mean? Well, you can actually figure it out by going back to the dashboard. And what I have right here is I actually have the resource groups. So if we find the right one, and that is not the right one, it might be this one. Yes, it is. See, I'm actually a pretty good guesser. I need to be. And so we can see right here, these are virtual machines for that small. And if we pop them open, you know what it is? It's just like a Sparks cluster. It's one of those E machines for efficiency. It's an 8 CPU, 64 gigabytes. And guess what? If we look back at it, we can see there's a bunch of them, right? It deployed, I think, 4 or 5 of them. So we don't have any control of it, but that's what they consider a small cluster from running. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 nodes in this cluster it's running. But you don't know about that. It's just like, hey, spun up a data warehouse, right? And it's kind of cool they did that. Now, the second thing you have to do, and we'll get it into it right now, is you have to set up some storage, right? And so again, we can use this without storage, but being local means we can't share with anyone else, right? So we definitely want to do storage. And when you do here, this is where it comes to play with that key vault. And what we want to do is add a Spock principal, and we have to put the storage count, how we're going to connect to it, the client ID. So that's your service principal, that's your directory, which, subscription you have, your tenant ID. That secret scope is that one I was showing you, so SS for key, secret scope, and then actual secret key to get in. Once that's in, we can actually mount the storage, okay? But it's all good. And the SQL editor, let's get into this. So this is some files I have on here. We'll get later into that. I'm just gonna say I made a change. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna save it, even though it didn't work. We'll just see if we can get it to work later. And again, I'm having a little demo issues today. But you get some, like, for instance, we have some sample data here. We also have like the meta storage, right? And we can see there's different database here. We have VentureWorks 1, and we can see it's a dim customer. Okay. And then if we go ahead and create a query, and again, I don't think this is going to work, but we'll see. Um, and it has a nice interface, right? It kind of looks like, something that you would get from a third generation language that would automatically have some type of IntelliSense, right? So it's thinking, hey, maybe I want currency, right? And then you can run it. Okay. And see, this is the reason why I think I'm having problems. It says invalid configuration. Now, I don't know if this is because it's pointing to the old one or the new one, but we'll figure it out. So we're going to discard this one, but that's where the Hive Metastore is, okay? And there's different samples, okay? So we're going to go back to this and see what our first one is. We'll have a demo, but I gave you a good introduction. We'll talk about alerts. Hopefully I can get that part of the demo working. Gonna hide this. And we talked about the warehouse. We have to always start one. We talked about the admin console, like for instance, the putting in the service principal. Talked about exploring. I showed you some Hive tables that were published. We'll talk about alerts later in queries, okay, and in a workspace.
John,
Yeah.
do you want to just minimize the Teams meeting pop-up window?
Sure, I will, and I'll go back.
There we go.
Awesome. So again, we're just wrapping up. I just gave you a quick introduction to the interface. Thank you for telling me that. And what we're going to do now is a simple database example, right? So to explore the warehouse interface, we're going to create a simple automobile database. I know this is going to work because we're going to use local storage, okay, versus remote storage. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to do schemas. Okay, so that's like a database. We're going to create some tables, some views. We're going to talk about statements, and we're going to talk about integrity. Okay, and we're going to talk about what it is, what type of database is. Okay, it doesn't support everything. Okay, it supports a bunch of syntax, but it doesn't support all the syntax of a database. Okay, so again, like I said, there's a workspace, right? And a workspace is like, hey, here's some sample dashboards, or this is my presentation, right? And this is my presentation. I'm going to open up the basic features, okay? And we can see, okay, from here and is basically the SQL language. Now, let's take a look at this because I'm curious and also I know something's broken. So I'm doing this not only for your benefit, for mine, right? Here's the SQL language. And one of the things we want to do is we want to see if there's some functions to list, hey, what's the storage, right? That's where I'm having some problems on, right? And I probably just missed a step. So we can see that everything's supported here, like create a database, create a table. And a database is the same synonymous with a schema, okay? We can create a view or alter a view, right? So these are things, drop all the objects and so on, a location, right? So I'm looking for, these are Delta Lake when it comes to optimizing, Databricks Delta, okay? Functions, you can optimize, you can vacuum, okay? And what I'm looking for is I thought there was one that did a list. There we go. So list. What does list do? List URL. List objects immediately contain the URL. I don't think this is going to help us though. Might not, but we could try doing it. We see it wants to do a credential. I don't know if that's going to work. But we'll get back to this demo and then I'll see if I can fix it when we get to the next one where I know it's going to break, okay? So at this point, we can see when we go into default, here's the default, and we have a bunch of different things like, databases, right? And so what we want to do is there's the Azure Databricks SQL, right, database. So we're going to run the statement, right? We have a cluster here running, or should I say a warehouse, right? And then what we want to do is just want to wait. And it says, whoops, no results back. So it tells you how long it took, right? So we can see the runtime, right? And we can see what it did behind it, right? It did some scheduling, it optimized the query, and it executed, okay? So this is kind of similar to like, Snowflake, you're going to get some results from when you execute a query. And now if we go to default, guess what? Our database is going. Awesome. So it does what we're used to when we're doing Snowflake or warehouse, right? So create schema if non-exist, and we're going to add a comment. So this is almost like, Oracle syntax, which is kind of cool. So we're going to do this. We're going to run this. Now it created a schema, supposedly. Now schema, like I said, is right there. And we can also, drop down here and say, hey, I want to use this schema. So it's another way to do it. And we can use the describe statement. What does that do for us? Okay, that's going to give us some information about it. So it tells us it's part of the Hive metastore. There's the name, there's the comment, and what it's doing, it's actually just creating a directory in which it's actually going to create the files underneath when it starts creating tables. We can also add additional information, just like extended properties. And the extended properties in this system or this language or database, warehouse, okay, is basically a bunch of tuples, right? Created by John Miner, created by Dave, okay? It's going to run this. And we're going to run it now to say, hey, describe it again. And guess we're going to see that we have more metaprop data here. Now that type of thing, why is it backend services unavailable? That doesn't make sense now because it is. And it worked. So it actually went ahead and it ran this, right? And at this point, we can see that we have the new properties for it, okay? I want to see, was there any errors here? Did pop up a couple errors, but I don't see anything here. Okay. It's always fun when you have something in the back of your mind. It's like, it's broken. How am I going to fix that? Still presenting though. So I'm going to create the table, and we can see that we want to use a two-part schema, right? We always want to use the database name or schema name dot table name because it's fully qualified and we don't get in trouble, okay? So we're going to create this continent table, okay? And what we're going to do is after it's done, backend service is unavailable, but I know that's not true. And then we're going to go ahead, come on. Okay. So I don't know why it keeps on saying failure to load this, but I know that it's there. Refresh. Okay. Okay, so now if we describe it, right, we run it, we're going to get it's still getting errors. Maybe it's because of that stupid storage mount, which if it keeps on doing this, I'm going to get rid of it and then we'll just try to fix it later. So we can see right here, there's a continent ID and a name, right? And again, this is the location. Now we know that it's a managed table, basically. That's what it is, and it's a Delta table, okay? So if you probably done any database work, you've probably seen it. And then what we can do is we can actually do an insert statement, and this looks like a SQL statement. We're inserting data now into the Hive table, Delta table, in fact. Okay, I thought I did it. Okay. So it told me a number of rows and number of rows inserted. Took 15 seconds. And again, this is not going to beat out SQL Server. This is made for warehousing. Okay. It's working with tables. So if you have larger data sets to mount and do queries on, that's where it's going to shine. It's not going to shine on little inserts, okay, when this toy database. But I wanted to show you the syntax of how you can do things. And now we can do a select star from the table. And then we're going to get to a couple things it doesn't support. It's one of those things that most warehouses don't support, but I want to point out, okay? So now we're going to create something called cars by country. And what we're going to do is, this is from Wikipedia. It's just some data that says, hey, this country had this many cars. And it's old data. This is a demo I did years ago, but I needed some data. I'm like, hey, this is a toy database. This is going to work perfect, right? So that's why I picked it. So now I'm going to insert some data here, and I'm going to do a select star from this. And now we're going to see 39 rows if everything's working correctly. It's kind of weird I was getting those errors. I'm wondering if they were just having some Databricks issue. Once in a great while, things do happen in Databricks. About a week ago, so they did have an outage. It's not like anything, it's not infallible to have an outage. So now we can see that we have a country ID here, right? And then we have a continent ID, and we inserted continents over here. So we can do a simple thing and say, hey, guess what? Let's join the two and do a query, right? That's something we do in SQL all the time. So nothing to write home about yet. Okay, so now we've said, hey, it's country one, right? We come over here, it's continent one. What is that? That's South America, okay? Now we can go ahead and we can create a view, right? That's typical stuff we do when we're, designing a database as a DBA. And then we can select from the view again. And again, this is all under the hood. It's Spark. It's all tables, but it looks like SQL, which is kind of cool. Now what we can do is we can add properties to it. So for instance, we could go ahead and alter the table and say, hey, I want a comment. Okay, execute. Now what's interesting is that the syntax is different. Before we describe, you could try doing a scribe on the table. It's not going to show you. There's a special command called comment on table you have to use, okay? And if you do comment on table, now you can see that the result is, hey, by the way, It was, this is actually putting a comment. This was set in properties. And now we alter the table. We can put a comment on the key itself. And then we're going to show you two things, right? We're going to show you the table list, right? And the list is going to show us what's the tables in there. And we can see that, hey, yeah, we have car data. We have cars by country. Oh, that's a view. So it thinks that tables of views, okay? And also continent here, okay? And we can also describe the table, okay? Let's see what this gives us. And we can see as a primary key and all the data types, but we don't see any of those comments. If we do show table extended though, okay, and we filter by it, now we get, ooh, this looks like a Hadoop thing. We got a dump over here, right? Let me see if I can move this over more. Maybe not. Doesn't allow me to minimize it, but I'll see if I can go this way and zoom in. Oops, wrong way. Wrong. Oops, too big. Right there. We can see this is, you know, it looks like kind of like a Hadoop dump here, right? It's a Hive meta store, right? Tells you the root, tells you checkpoints, right? Tells you the type, right? And can we see my comment? We can see that my comment there, created by and date. So that's on the table. Okay, change percentage and so on. So last thing, I'm going to minimize this a little less. We can go back here. We did this one. We show the extended, right? If we describe table extended, which is a totally different syntax, they all have a little different syntaxes here. We can not only get the top stuff, which is the actual schema of the table, but we can see that all the fun stuff we had before, and now we can see the table properties, right? And we see John Minor and created by, okay? So I just showed you a bunch of ways to add comments, create tables, and create views. Nothing that you say, hey, by the way, John, that's nothing to write home. And I'd say, yeah, that's true, right? So here's the thing. You must have Unity Catalog enabled, and I do not have it enabled, okay? You have to basically create a file storage and then push your actual Hadoop file system out to external storage so that it can be connected to like one or more Hive systems, okay? So I haven't done that yet. However, you can define a primary key or a foreign key, but just like a warehouse, they're there just to tell the optimizer how to do things better. It's not there to enforce integrity, okay? In fact, if I go ahead and I run this, it's going to error out. See, constraint is not supported with Hive Metastore. And if we minimize this, or I can move this down, whoops, doesn't let me do that. But it would. But anyways, if we go over here and we run the second one, right, I'm going to try to do a non-primary key or a foreign key. Still doesn't allow me to do it, right? There's one thing that it does do though, okay? It allows you to do change percent, at a check constraint. And that's because it's actually stored with the table and it knows that, hey, I don't have to look at another file, which is a table basically, so I can do it right here. So I know that some are greater, the change percent is less than 10%, right? So I'm going to try to alter this, okay? And put this in. And again, remember, we dropped the whole database when we were recreating this, right? And so now it says, whoops, guess what? 8 rows in a Hive fail. Okay, so we can fix this by putting 100 because we know that the change percent has to be less between those two values, right? At least in my example. And now, boom, we can do a check constraint. So again, the only type of constraint that's valid is a check constraint, okay? Now let's do some CRUD statements, okay? We can select star from the countries and say, hey, is it Greenland there? Because I didn't see Greenland. I like Greenland. I like that movie, Greenland. You know, I always wanted to go to Greenland. Let's put Greenland in there. So we're going to hit run. And this is going to insert a record. Okay, and now if we run this, we're going to see that record. Okay, and if we update it, okay, and run, we are changing the change percent to 10% now, right? And if we look at it, we can see that field's been changed. It was like a copy, it was 1 or something like that when we initially put it in 0, I think it was. Now it's 10, right? 0, Now it's 10. And then guess what? We can delete it, okay? So again, I'm showing you in that even though we're working with files, this is just doing CRUD. It works. It's not that fast, but it's not that slow. It's pretty good. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about identity column. This is one of the things that you always want to do, right? You always want to say, hey, guess what? I'm gonna create identity column, right? So I'm gonna create a new table called emissions, right? And what I want to do is I want to big it int. I want the country ID, the year and emissions map because everyone's worried about greenhouse gas, right? So I'm going to do some emissions. And I'm going to insert 2 rows. And you can see this is fake data, just some 2 rows, has nothing to do with real data I didn't get from Wiki. I just made it up. I didn't really care. It's just want to show you what's going to happen, okay? So at this point, now what we do is if we like select star, there should be an order increment on the very first one, right? So we get 1, 2, it's all upon, whatever order is. I didn't order it by, so it just comes back random, try it. So what I can do is I can delete from here, try it. And we know that if we go ahead and do redo inserts 1 and 2, guess what? We're gonna get 3 and 4, try it. Even though it deleted it, it didn't reset the counter, try it. So we run this again. And now we got 3. Maybe it didn't run the second one. Did I not do both? Maybe I didn't, but we could run the second one here. We'll get 4. So we run this and we get the next one. We get 4. Okay. So we know in SQL Server, you just do a truncate, right? And a truncate will fix this problem, right? And do you think it's going to work in Databricks? Any takers? It's a yes, no. 50-50. Orc, what do you think?
Yeah.
And the answer is no. You picked the wrong pill. It does not work. And that's the reason why I want to show you this. So just be careful when using inserts with this warehouse. It doesn't support what you think would happen with the truncate, okay? So for you to actually do it, and what you need to do is you actually need to create or replace the table. So you just need to drop the whole schema and remake it because we know that a truncate is going to empty it anyway. So what's the difference between that and just saying, hey, redo the whole schema, right? So now if we run and replace the whole schema, and now we insert the 2 values, guess what? We're going to get 1, 2 again. So that's the only interesting thing that I found with this service is that it doesn't do integrity, right? So your constraints, foreign key constraints are not going to work, only checks. And the second thing is the truncate doesn't work the way you expect it. And now we got 1, 2, okay? So let's end our first demo. Let's talk about data lake files, and I hope I get this part working. You might have to bear with me for 5 minutes to go off track to fix it. I was close, okay? So let's talk about Azure Storage first before we get into this. One of the things cool about data lake storage, and if you don't know it, and this is like your first presentation on data lake storage, is that everything in Azure has 3 copies. All the services are built upon Azure Blob Storage, and Blob Storage has 3 copies, so you more than likely have 3 copies of everything, right? And business continuity can be increased by geo-replication. So if we go into another data set now, we get 6 copies, right? And there's something called peers, right? So North America East might be paired with West data center. And I've never seen this myself in which a whole data set went down, but supposedly in China way back, 5 years ago, it did happen, which they had a fire and they had to fail over and they did, recover like 99% of the data, which is pretty miraculous. How do you get to access the storage, right? There's several ways to get to a storage count, right? And again, I'm going to right click to make sure I am in hiding this view because I always forget that. So there's a storage account key. And so there are 2 keys per account. They can be rotated. There's shared access signature. This is a better way to do it, right? Because we not only say, hey, with the storage key, you get everything. You get read, write, execute, and you have all rights, right? Shared access, now we can say it's just this container, and it's maybe a read, write, and it's for a given time, maybe 30 days, right? And the last one is service principal. And this is a finer way to give it out because not only can we give it to a container, but we can give it to folders and files, okay? And that might be the reason why I'm having issues. We'll have to see. Maybe it doesn't have the right chip. How do we get stuff to data lake storage, right? There's several ways to do it. We can go ahead and we can copy to data lake storage, okay? We can use AZ copy command. We can also use PowerShell, okay? So I'm not going to go into it. You can also use the portal, which I showed you. Azure Data Lake Storage details. Why do we want to use it? Well, first and foremost, they came out with this for basically, um, Synapse and Spark because guess what? They needed something that was a Hadoop compatible file system. And until they did that, Databricks couldn't run here. And, basically, Synapse now has a Spark component, which only happened within the last 3 years, say. And before that, they couldn't run there too. So that's one of the main reasons why they came with Gen 2 is the HDFS compatibility, okay? A lot of cool other features, encryption at RAS and transit, firewalls, right? Get your VNets. Always had even in version 1, but it was kind of kludgy, but in version 2 is much better, RBAC and ACLs, okay? You're going to always hear about when you start working with this, like we talked about how to use it as a database, and what it's really doing is under the hood, it's doing something internally in its own storage. But that doesn't mean you can share it with someone. Like the final results, you create tables. Say that data engineer wants to access that Delta table. It's really hard, right? But if you have it external somewhere, it's a lot easier to do. And so you'll hear about different zones and data quality, right? And don't worry about streaming batch because we're not doing data engineer, we're just doing database. But you'll have like, hey, the bronze, you might want to attach to a table in the bronze, and that means it's raw data. And then silver might be attached to a file that has been enriched a little, and gold is like really curated data. Various file types, okay? So you can definitely mount some types with, create table as well as copy into. And there's going to be two types that you can use. You can use a weak file type format, okay? And I call those like a CSV, right? It can be easily broken. You put a new comma in somewhere, it suddenly breaks, right? And there's also strong file types, which I loved, right? Like Parquet, you don't have to tell it anything. It already knows that the first column is SSN. You don't know it because it's a binary format. You can't see it, but it knows it once you read it, right? It also knows that SSN happens to be maybe your schema definition decides to make it a big number, right? A big int versus actually being a var chart, right? But maybe if you were in Canada and Social Security had alphas in it, it would be an alphanumeric, right? But again, it already knows that. It also does some cool things like, compression and so on. Um, this is where we're having access with the demo, setting up data access. So I might have to go and take a look at this really. There's 3 ways to set up access: a service principal, a storage credential, and shared access signature, okay? If I don't get this working, we'll go ahead and use a shared access signature to do the demo, but I'm hoping to get the service principal working, okay? And so that's where it broke. Um, let's bring up the second demo, see if it's still broke. So I'm gonna discard this. Gonna go back to my warehouse, and there's gonna be different demos. So this is data lake files, right? And it says copy AdventureWorks data lakes. Okay, so this is me. So I already did that, right? So just a pointer for me for setting up the demo. So create the CSV files, okay? So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna create something called AdventureWorks 2. So if we look in here, on the default, guess what? There was AdventureWorks 2, it's gone. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to create a schema, going to alter it, and then we're going to use it, okay? So nothing to write home about, simple stuff that we've done before. Okay, now this is where it's breaking, and let's see if I can do this. I had before a storage container at storage account, windows.core, bronze, silver. So let's go back to here. And again, Warwick, while I'm doing this, any questions so far yet?
No questions.
So everyone knows everything then. It's good though. I'm at least teaching somewhat halfway decent tonight, even though the demo didn't work.
Hey, John, it's great. Listen, I did have one in the chat.
Yeah,
Just a
sure.
couple of things too. Service principles are PAL, not a PLE, too.
Okay,
which
sorry.
appears in many places. Hey, but the bigger picture question I've got is, I see people who have data that's sitting in databases, and they seem mad keen now, in many cases, to pick it up and drop it out into a data lake, into files. and
Yep.
then try and do this sort of manipulation with it. And in the end, they end up using tools that are far less capable than the database it was sitting in the first place, where it was also better typed and more strongly structured and so on.
Mhm.
And you got to say, well, like, how are they better off in any way than just having it sitting in a database?
It all depends where your company's going, where they want to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have a lot of different stuff and you just wanted to poke at the data, okay, and it's in a data lake anyways, then it's easy to do this, right? Oh, phew, it's finally working. Yay! So awesome. So yeah, that's a big question. That's a philosophy question, right? The reason why you want to use data lake is because you can put a lot more in it, right? I can put a petabyte of stuff out in the data lake. Do I want to slap a SQL table on a petabyte of data? Probably not if I'm not using it all, right?
Most people never do, though, right? So
Exactly. But there's some people like you might maybe Thomas Grosher, you talk to him, he has a petabyte
yeah.
of stock information over the last 20 years and they're trying to do predictions on it. Yeah, it makes sense, right? But for most people it doesn't, right? Um I think this is just a great way that if you have some data in a data lake and that you have some BAs that like in between novice that they know enough SQL, you can give them this tool and they can get up and running with the data lake and do stuff they're used to in SQL. So not exactly answers your question, but if you want to write me all offline, we can debate
I
this
don't know.
forever because it's one of those philosophical things, you know?
It just seemed to, in many cases, I understand it if the data is already in a data lake. I understand it if it's coming from other sources where that makes sense. But when someone takes it out of a database where it's in a nice structure and then takes it out and puts it into this, and you think, I could have just queried it, in another database or something, it just would have worked so much better. But, anyway.
You know what? I felt that way when I first started using this stuff. So I understand. I was like, my friend Brian Kafke is like, oh yeah, you need to do, database. But you know what? 90% of my work is still here, is coming from here. I still get some SQL work once in a while, but a lot of people just don't pay me to do SQL work, and so I go where the work is. And unfortunately, so yeah, that's where I think technology is going, and that's it.
Okay.
So, getting back to the demo, awesome question, by the way. Why use a data warehouse slash data lake over a database? And the question is, it all depends on you, for sure. Um, I just fixed the demo. I moved the storage, so we had to mount it, and there was a quirky thing going on, but it might have just been because, I had it's up and maybe it just didn't take my settings right away. That sometimes happens, right? With these technologies that are distributed. So no, I did is this is using a syntax that is a Spark SQL syntax. So we're going to drop it if it exists, right? And we're going to create it if it doesn't, right? And we're going to ascribe it. So what I'm doing is I'm basically taking all the data from the AdventureWorks. We love AdventureWorks, right? And I'm just going to load it all up. So making sure this all works. So I'm going to go all the way down to the end. And let's try running the whole thing. Maybe it worked, maybe not. It's cool. So drop customer. Do I have to select it all? Maybe I have to select it all. I forget. That's another thing I have to do in here. Forget. You can run all, or you can limit 1,000, right? So try doing the customer one, but I'm gonna go ahead and just make sure I highlight this and then hit run. Okay, so that's gonna make sure that it's gonna run what I want. Okay. So I'm gonna let that run. We'll come back to that in a second. Let's talk about loading tables. Okay. So right now, there's some definite interesting load patterns, right? If you've done ETL and I've done it more years than I can count, I'm two hands for sure. There's the full load pattern. It's the easy one. Just drop and replace, right? And there's incremental. And incremental, you start off with a full load, right? So we have to run a bunch of years or months over. So say we had 2 years, I have to load 24 times months. And then maybe we have a daily update file, right? So we have to do some upserts, okay? Does this support it? Yes, it does. It actually does a merge statement. In fact, when we do the copy into, right? it copies data from one place to another. And if we go ahead and we tell it to copy to it again, it will incrementally load. Also, we can do that in say a raw zone or raw table, staging table, and then merge it into the final one. So you can do the similar data patterns that you do with a data warehouse. Okay. Like I've done Snowflake before. Guess what? Fivetran would put it into a staging table. Once in the staging table, maybe I'd take a look at, find something interesting, and merge it into the final table. Delta file format. I'm just going to tell you a little about it. A lot more to be discussed if you want to really worry about it. One thing's you're going to get time traveled, right? It's allowing you to have files that look like tables because it's snapshot isolation. It's open source. It has ACID, okay? And I'm talking about LSD from the 70s. I'm talking about atomic, consistent, independent, and durable. And last but not least, it does schema enforcement, okay? Hive tables, two types, managed and unmanaged. You're not going to really have to worry about this in here, but it's a good thing to know. What we did when we said, hey, create table, okay, and we said X and then we inserted stuff into it, given a schema, that was a managed table. It's actually local on the local disk. And I call it local disk, but it's really remote. Everything in Azure is remote. The only reason why I call it local is I didn't have to mount it or I didn't have to put that storage key like I was trying to get set up before. Unmanaged, okay? Those are ones we're creating now, okay? You give it a location in the blob storage that's remote. You can see it in a URL, and other people can get to that data, okay, or make changes. Let's talk about AdventureWorks. So now what we're going to do is create the AdventureWorks database from Parquet files. Okay, we'll try that. I think I'm going to have to upload those because they're not there. And then create the AdventureWorks database from CSV files as unmanaged in the bronze, okay? So examples 3 and 4. So let's go back. We're working on 3 right now. So did we get everything? And the answer is yes, we did. So we have everything here. We got a fact, internet sales, reasons, so on, currency. We got 11 different tables, if I remember right. So that's example 3. This is, as we can see right here, it's unmanaged. It's actually, is it really a table? No, it's actually just really schema on read, the metadata over a table exists, okay? That's what we're doing here. So now if we come back here to 4, read from Parquet files, right? How much more time do I have? Because we had issues. I'm going to skip over some of these demos. Again, I will fix this and put it here, but make sure whatever you use for your storage, you fix this. The syntax is wicked light for this because remember we know, okay, that in here we had to tell it because there's no header, so we had to give it a header. We also had to say it's a delimited, right? When we use Parquet, it doesn't really care. It already knows what it is, right? So I'll just recreate one table. We're going to drop, we're going to use AdventureWorks 1, run. This will be only a short part of the whole demo, and then we'll skip to the next one because we're running out of time. We can see currencies here in AdventureWorks 1, right? And we just used it. And what I can do now is I can actually remove it. So if I run this, okay, I don't know why is it saying that. I might have to drop the whole thing because it might be that all this is bound to, let's drop the whole thing and just recreate one table. It might be bound to the old directory that I had there before, and that might be causing problems. Okay, so now I recreated it. Now I'm going to use it. We already know it's here anyway, it's being used. Now I'm going to drop it, okay? Boom. So now we can say is create table if not exist, dim currency using delta. Okay, and so what the interesting thing is that this is using sales LT dim delta. Let me see. I don't know if I have that published. Let's see. So if you're going to do this yourself, right, we do currency and then there's a partition there. So there's a little setup that's wrong. So I'm not going to do this demo. But if we were doing this, we would say this is one way to do it. We create a table if non-exist using delta. And then we're doing, this might still work though. Looking at this again, let's see if I can get one working. Because I'm a little frustrated that my demo did not go good, which usually does not happen for me. For Martin, it's known fact, right, Martin? I'm joshing with you. So let's do this again. This is going to remove it. And this is going to create an empty Delta table. So if we take a look at this, it's going to create a table. And if we look at, I don't know how it did that. Are we in the right one? I didn't tell it to do it. So storage account, AOS Gen 2. Is there Silva? Maybe there is Silva there. Let's go. Let's see. I'm in the wrong directory, so maybe the Silva does have it then. Silva, sales LT. Oh, it does. That's why it's working. Okay, so I basically pointed it to the Delta. Okay, and it actually found it, even though it's there. Then I say copy into Delta from, and then I could overwrite this, okay, from the Parquet files. But because this was existing here and I didn't delete it, okay, it didn't really drop it. See, if I drop this, run this, and there's some idiosyncrasies, okay, with this. It's supposed to remove it, right? If I come here and I hit refresh, it didn't really remove it, okay? Now if I delete this, yes, okay, it's getting rid of my customer Delta file, right? Or the currency one. And now if we go ahead and create this is going to create me an empty file. Basically an empty table with no schema, which is kind of cool that you can create this, right? Because you can't do that, right? In SQL, you can't say create table and not give it a column, but it did it here, right? And now to get this to work, I'm going to have to put sales LT Parquet file. So let's do this really quick. Just want to show it because I think it's worth showing you this. It's kind of important. So sales LT, we don't have a directory here, so I need to create it. So I'm going to add directory. If I remember right, Parquet dash files, right? Hit save. Okay. And then now we're going to go to Parquet files. And we're going to go back to this example. And it's looking for just a dim currency directory. Okay. So it needs a dim currency directory. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look here, and this is just a dim currency directory, and then I just need that one file there posted, and it'll work. So dim underscore directories, add directory, dim currency. Okay, save. And now I'm going to upload that one Parquet file. You can upload the other stuff. It's really not needed unless you do in Hive. Like Hive has like a bunch of other control files that, you know, like a commit or whatever, success. Don't need it here. So I'm going to upload this. And now you get my Parquet, which is the data file here. Okay. And the syntax is kind of like all the big Vox, you know, warehouse usage, right? Which is we created this empty schema. Now we're going to do a copy into, okay, from the location, tell it to file, and we're going to merge the schema, okay? It's going to run this. And if this works, we can do the select and describe, and we're going to get the same answers we had before, okay? So it said 105 rows. And now if we take a look, maybe it uses the show table. And what's another thing I want to show you is this, is that unlike results, right? You don't get Mars here. You don't have multiple result sets, okay? I ran two, but only showed one, okay? So if you really want to take a look at this, okay, you have to run it again. Say, oh yeah, now I can see the data, okay? So we did those. Okay, other topics. I'm getting short to the wire here, and then we'll see if we can get over the real cool ones. What are schedules, dashboards, and alerts? Schedules, queries can be set, unlike you do them like in SQL Server. If I create a query and save it, I can also set it on a schedule. Say, hey, run this query all this time, right? Dashboards. Dashboards can be created to support visualizations. Parameters can be used to make the visuals dynamic. Alerts. Queries can be created to support visualizations, right? So we have view, visualization, dashboard, and schedule. Those are examples 4, 5, okay? So let's see if I can get them working. So I am hoping that it's based on version 1. If it isn't, I'm going to have to load the rest of the table. So let's try this one, query data. Okay. So we're going to use VentureWorks 2, which this one is VentureWorks 1. Good. Okay, so now in here, we're going to create a query, and I'm going to show you what you can do. So we can go VentureWorks 2, and we're just going to, one of the things I always like to do is say, hey, let's union all the data put a label, what's the name of the table and what's the row count, right? This is kind of like one of those ETL things when I was at the bank. Hey, you need to know if you loaded $1 trillion, do you still have $1 trillion? It's how many rows, it's how many dollars, right? And we can see there's 11 rows. It worked pretty quick, right? We can also create a view called prepared data, okay? And basically it's going to, join these tables we have, use a bunch of them. And it shows that, hey, by the way, yes, you can join data. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do it. Select. Now you can see one of the things, VentureWorks 1, why does it? Okay. So there is a problem with this because it is hard-coded to 1. So what we're going to do is just, for this demo, just fix this so I can get it to work. So change this to, and put VentureWorks 2, and then hit replace all. Okay, close it, and then gonna go here and do run all. Okay, so then just do Control-A and then run. Okay, it does not like create, so let me do this one. Does it not like it because it's not a semicolon? There we go. So now if we take a look at this, we can see that it actually created data and then we aggregated data, okay? Which is kind of interesting. I know this is that, in 2010, if we can look at how many bikes were sold in Europe, we can see it's $4,000, North America and Pacific, okay? So it kind of works, okay? Awesome. So what can we do? One of the things you can do in this is you can also do dashboarding, okay? So we show you the query. Let's go to workspace under number 6, right? Visualizations. How do we get a dashboard? The first thing we have to do in the dashboard is we have to do some type of visualization. So we do the same query, only the query I showed you before. Now there's things you can do like year picker. I can put a year and say, hey, I want to look for a year. So now I can go ahead and say, hey, show me what the data looked like in 2012. Okay. And oops, table of view not found because again, I put in the wrong place. So I'm going to save it. And now we're going to run this again. So we're going to use year picker 2012. I'll make 13 apply changes. And now it should run this and give us the results. To actually get a dashboard, and what we do is we go ahead and we make visualizations, okay? It's kind of not as cool as Power BI, but they're pretty cool, right? You can do some things. So we can see the 2013, the actual sum of the total amounts, okay, for each year. We can see sales counts, okay? And then what we can do is now we take that data and we can pin it to a dashboard. So if we look at a dashboard, the VentureWorks dashboard, we can see one of these is going to work, or they're both on the same new updated one, which is great. And we can have them in different things. So I can take here and say, hey, I want to look 13 as the net sales amount versus the sales count of 12, or you can adjust it, whatever. So simple visualizations are supported here. Okay, if we go back to the workspace, now what's interesting, one of the things I didn't show is queries is it shows historical queries. So when this was running, is there anything scheduled? Okay, we're going to schedule something. Workspace. So if we go back to that, I showed you the VentureWorks dashboard. Let's schedule a query. Okay. So in this query, what we're going to do is we're going to create a table called car mileage as a big int. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start with 1 and combine and by run. And we're going to insert in here some random data. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to schedule this, okay, to run, okay, every, say, 1 minute. Hit OK because we don't have much time left. And now I save it. So now we can see the query saved, okay? And now we can see if we select this one query right here and run it, okay, we got 1 row. Okay, so it just ran. So we can also verify that by coming over here and saying, hey, is this query? So created by, refresh schedule, never. Let's see if this hopefully kicks off in 1 minute, and then I'll show you how to do alerts, which alerts is kind of cool. And you can't do this in SQL. So there's a few bells and whistles with this warehouse that you can do here that you can't do in a regular database. So alert query, refreshed, never. Let's go back to the workspace. It was scheduled query. So this is it. So I don't think this might be not the one then. I always forget which one to schedule. Let me look at the other one. Workspace and then alert query, let's say. Okay, so what the alert query is going to do, it's going to look at this mileage we're doing and every 5 say, hey, guess what? I want to throw alert. Okay, it's a very simple alert. So we can see here, there's no data, right? What we want to do here is say, hey, is this really running, right? It's supposed to be scheduled. I thought it was scheduled. And guess what? Oh, there's 2. So it is scheduled. We got the alert query here. Let's go ahead and create alert. How do you set up alert, right? So there's number 10 is alert, okay? So it's based on alert query, right? And there's one other thing I have to do. So flag equals 1. Notifications are set to default, refresh never. So what I need to do is I need to change this refresh. So I'm going to do is edit, and I'm going to say refresh every 1 minute. So every 1 minute, I'm going to run this alert now. So say I have some condition which I'm doing, say, merging in the database from things coming in, and once a day it comes in, and I write alert saying, hey, I should have at least 100 sales every day. If I don't have 100 sales, there's something wrong with this process, right? This is what's going to happen. So I'm going to let that run off and wrap up because we're pretty much out of time, but there's a couple things I want to go over. I did all the demos and I got about 2 more minutes if I'm reading it right, but I'll probably take 5 if you don't mind work. And then I will go ahead and answer any questions. So Unity Catalog. One of the things I did not talk about is Unity Catalog, but it's a big deal if you haven't heard about it, okay? Companies might have multiple data lakes. Okay, how can you share the data between these workspaces? So for instance, say data engineering has a data lake that has some raw data coming in from manufacturer. The engineer data scientists have another data lake that has some predictions. Maybe I want to marry the 2 up. That's how you do it with the Unity catalog. Okay. We also saw that some things don't work without the Unity catalog, such as foreign primary key constraints. They're only really there for the optimize. They're not enforced. Okay, just like most data warehouses. Second thing, delta sharing. This is another reason why you want the Unity catalog is delta sharing allows you to share from one place to another. Okay, so we can have partner B here, and we can say, hey, read only from partner A, or we can have it sharing out to partner C, which really doesn't even have Databricks. Maybe they're just using, Tableau or Power BI. Guess what? Delta sharing allows you to get there. Okay, table cloning. Okay. There's nothing that's supported there, and you can do this with the create table statement too. I didn't show it here because you could spend all night, going through all the syntax of this environment. But there's 2 types of clone. Okay, there's a shallow clone, and that's sometimes called a 0 copy clone. Okay, and that's great because now I can make dev look like production as long as you don't worry about PPI information. Hopefully you don't have any, then you don't have to worry about, and guess what? They're in sync, right? Deep clone is when you actually make a copy of the object, okay? And that's supported also. Third-party products, okay? A lot of stuff when you work with these products, and I mean, i.e. data warehouses, I've used Fivetran. It's a great utility. It allows you just to say, hey, I got a DB2 database on premise. I got these databases all over the place. Guess what? I want you to use change data capture and just move it over. Okay, so that's a utility move over. There's also Hevo. That's another partner. I just put it in here. How about moving the schemas, right? We got the data over it, but guess what? We want to move a schema change from the upper environment to a lower environment. The only way to do this right now is to do that, create a replace statement and reload, right? Alt to table. The problem with that is that it's time consuming if you do it by hand. DBT's out there, take a look at it. It's written in Python, allows you to actually migrate schemas. Okay. Corporate reporting, you have a data warehouse that's useless unless you report on it. So this is some type of aggregations you might be doing. Some simple reports I showed you can do, but guess what? A lot of people want their own reports. Power BI and Tableau are also supported on the SQL endpoint. In a nutshell, Databricks support for basic SQL queries. We saw that there's no procedure-oriented queries are not supported with this version, okay? It's not supposed to replace advanced engineering, graph or machine learning workloads running in Python or Spark, which are currently handled, okay? And I copied this from one of the engineers on Stack Overflow because I thought it was, in a nutshell, telling you what this is, right? Databricks SQL provides a simple experience for SQL users who want to run ad hoc queries on their data lake, create multiple visualization types, explore query results from different perspectives, and build a shared dashboards. That's all it does. Okay, that's what the product is. And yeah, I would say that, getting to a data lake is great, but it's always adoption, right? And if you can use a product like this to get adoption widely in your company, it's a win-win, right? Unity catalog's great when you want to share data, okay? One of the comments I would say is the visualizations and dashboards are kind of immature at this point. But if you have a data lake and you're trying to give them something similar to a data warehouse, then this is a great product. Let's take one last quick look, see if it actually notified me. Hopefully it did. And then we'll call it a night or a day. And I don't see it here, but did it not do it? Let's see. Just trust me that it does work. Again, I had a little demo issues today. We'll take one quick look at this to make sure it ran. So we can see the schedule should have been, see this alert query, never, but see this schedule query ever. So this, don't know why it didn't work. It should have actually fired because this alert query here, if we go into it and we run this probably should be 0, but if we go here, we can see that this one's probably a lot more now. So maybe we just missed it, say, and we're on 7 right now. So, okay. Well, enough of me talking. I'm going to give it back to work. You still there? No one's sleeping?
Right.
That is what
You.
SQL Warehouse for Databricks is in a nutshell. Do we have any questions?
But so at this stage, we've got one. So Jared has asked, does that mean that procedural SQL is supported in other more advanced versions?
No. And remember, this is all upon Spark, right? And so because it's on upon Spark, that typically Spark was built with using a programming language like Scala and using data frames. And data frames are like tables. They're like, hey, guess what? Read it into, hey, this thing called a data frame. And it has rows and it has columns. And you can do methods to it like, hey, filter and aggregate. But it's not SQL, right? And you can do Spark SQL by saying, hey, expose this as a temporary view and take my coffee mug over here, exposes another temporary view. And guess what? I can write some SQL to join it, and I could say, hey, this data frame's the output of that SQL statement. But in reality, there's no stored procedures there. If you want anything that's procedural, like to do loops or to do something like that, you're going to have to use the data engineering feature of Spark and use, Python or a language. I don't know if they're going to get there yet. If you like this product, try to push for adoption on it. It's been out there about 1.5 years or 2, and I think it has a great use case for, SQL users that want to use a warehouse, but I just haven't seen a lot of traction on it yet.
Okay. So anybody else have any other questions for John before we wrap up for today's session? Feel free to put your hand up, put it in the chat window, or bring yourself off of mute, and you're able to ask John your question yourself. So,
And just
Jared,
make sure you don't
another...
change your demo environment just before you speak in that works group, because you'll waste 5 minutes. So I apologize. Go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for your presentation. Very informative. I know nothing about Databricks. I've only heard about it briefly. So I guess my query is coming from way on the outside. I have a background in SQL. I've been playing in SQL in geoscientific databases for some 10, 15 years. So I'm glad to see that there's a SQL supported world, I suppose, that you could flip across to if whatever you're in dries up. But I guess coming here from Australia, I guess we tend to follow the US a fair bit. You guys probably 12 months, 2 years in front in terms of those sort of trends. What's your perception in terms of the longevity of Databricks? Is it here to stay, or is it just another one of these databasey fads that's going to be sort of fly by the night? You're going to see people going to rush across, and I guess my particular interest is in the mining industry. If you know of anyone in the mining industry that's starting to sort of move across in that direction at all.
Yes, turning off Mike's storage is perfect. I wish it did. And for your question, Jared, here's the thing. Databricks is around. It's on 3 platforms. So it's not going anywhere. It's on Google, it's on AWS, and it's also on Azure. So if you've ever played with, and it sounds like you haven't, but I have, right? If you played with the different Spark versions, there's one for Synapse and there's one for Databricks. The one for Databricks is just easier. You can switch from, hey, I got a cluster, I got this notebook, I want to go run this notebook. Guess what? Point to it, run. Guess what works? You try to do the same thing in Spark Synapse, right? Under Synapse, right? Spark, and guess what? It gets stuck on that cluster. Then you have to disconnect. Then you have to restart your cluster. So there is a lot of bugs currently. Don't tell Microsoft. Shh. Sorry, Microsoft, but I'm just telling you the truth, right? I'm being honest here. That if they get them fixed, they're going to compete more with Databricks. But right now, Databricks is definitely the market leader for Spark. And the reason why is the founder actually was the guy who wrote it. Okay, he went to school. This is his puppy. He's nurtured it for the last 15 years. It's a great product. As for data warehouses using Spark, I hope it gets caught on. However, this is not the only data warehouse out there that is really good. The other leading product in the market is Snowflake. Snowflake does the same thing. If you put the files into a directory and use something called Snow Pipes, which automatically loads into a table, then guess what? You have a data warehouse also, okay? You can do something similar to, you can have both. You can have a data lake which has all the data on storage in S3 or in Azure, and then you can use Snowflake to suck it in from the storage, right? And that uses, if it's funny, if you look at the architectural diagram, okay, of what a Spark cluster is and what a Snowflake data warehouse is, so similar. That's why it didn't take much work for Databricks to actually transition from a Spark to a data warehouse. The thing they had to do is optimize their queries, and that's why they came out with Photon. So did that answer your question? I don't think they're going to get procedural execution anytime soon, and I hope the product, this one, really becomes popular. But you can't go wrong by doing Spark in Databricks or doing data warehouse and then Snowflake.
Yeah, thanks, John.
You're welcome.
Hey, anybody else have any other questions for John before we wrap up this session for this month?
I was going to say, please send me some warm weather. I want spring to be here.
Not too far.
I know, it's getting there.
So Jack's typing a question.
Yep, and you can go off mute if you want to. Cool. He just said great. Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, if there are no further questions, I'd like to say a big thank you to John for giving up his time, coming along and presenting to our group down here. Big thank you to everybody who has joined this session. I hope you have learned as much today as I have. A fantastic session from John. So on behalf of both myself and Martin Catherall, thank you, John. Thank you all of the attendees. The session is being recorded and will be placed up onto the YouTube channel where you can come back and watch this session again. John did put in the chat windows where you can get the details that you can follow along and do everything that he has done here today from his GitHub repository. So feel free, if that's something you would like to do, take advantage of that and learn from John's experience. So with that, thank you all. Have a fantastic month and look forward to seeing you all online in a month's time.
Nice one, Sean. Great session.
Hey, thank you.
A lot.